Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. Little trouble with the chat box tonight. Decided to go ahead and do something. OBS does one thing that Minicam just will not do, and that's memorize scenes. And so I'd like to get past that someday and actually get that to work a little better. Everything else should be up. I've got some special surprises tonight. I hope others will be joining us. I had a great time with the Q&A afterwards. Really good questions, and I really sort of enjoyed it. So it's good to get people more involved. And so we're going to get kind of underway. Let me do a little advertisement. I don't do this all the time, but I'm going to do this tonight. I'm going to actually go ahead and let you know about a free concert. How many of you would like to be able to attend a free concert? And so I'm going to actually let you know about this. I'm going to go here and I'm going to give you a clip of this. Now, Chosen People, you would just go to chosenpeople.com/concert and you could get your own seat there, virtual. Let me let you know what you'll be hearing. But it's just an attempt to go ahead in this particular time of COVID and with some of the other things going on and just do something kind of neat. So I'm going to start this and hope it'll play.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, Jerusalem. May there be peace within your walls.
And the pain, come and praise Creator's name. Oh, 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 oh,
Prisoners of hope, be now restored. The Lion of Judah is praising his sword. One nation, one king, people of God sing. Lord from Zion, from the east, from the west, to worship your holy
Hi. So we're getting some streaming problems here. I'm going to turn off my mic for just a sec here. Hi guys, I'm sorry about that. My phone is interfering with the stream tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the high speed. It seems to have gone out and gotten high speed, and it's creating some problems. As you can see, though, I want to let you know that that's a free concert. Chosen People would love to see you there. You just go there. That's just for them to keep account so that they can be aware of what's going on here. That should help. Every so often my cell phone gets in the way of everything else. So that is a special treat. And that's kind of where we're at. We're going to get started with tonight. Now, I know that some people are not in the house. That's okay. I do also know there are other streamers around other than me. And so it is highly possible that people are enjoying some of the other streamers that are out there. But I am happy to have you folks here. Last night, the page with the streaming looked beautiful. Tonight, it's having a little bit of trouble. And I'm going to see how I can save scenes a little better from Minicam, or we may be revisiting OBS temporarily, but I would really like to make this work a little better. So every so often we have a technical glitch, and thank you for being patient. If you're a visitor, thank you for tolerating the interruption of what we were doing and some of the glitching. It's just a bad night. Hopefully you can see this a little clearer. It's just kind of a strange night for everything. Our high speed must be really getting some use. So hang in there with me while we deal with our lovely computer tech issues of the night. The PowerPoints are always available to you. So if you go to Zion's Banner on Facebook, you will find it. If you go to Twitter and you punch my name in, you will find it. So if you have trouble seeing the PowerPoint tonight, you can always have your very own copy. It's posted early for some of the Patreon folks, just as kind of a courtesy, but it is made available to everybody. We're going to be talking about the parables tonight. We're in chapter 13, so let's get underway and see what we can do. And then afterwards, or even during, I can switch to the chat box and work around there. So if you have your phone, you can go to Matthew 13. If you have your Bible, you can go to Matthew 13. And let's just start taking a look at this. I'm going to pull over better. Here we go. And see what we've got here. And I am going to just check our stream health just to see if it came up. And it's just a bad night for streams. What can I say? Now we start with our Nosh of Hebrew. So kudos to Steve, who is enjoying this. I think other people are too. But it's been fun to see people have a good time with this. I'm going to shrink this down. Now, the Nosh of Hebrew is just a quick look at a Hebrew word. We look at the concept. We see that there are sometimes a range of meanings within a central concept, and look at that central concept. So a nosh is just like a snack. If you're hungry between meals, you have a nosh. It's a Yiddish word, and this is our Nosh of Hebrew. So you're going to see that come up. Today's word, Shamael. Sorry, Shamain. Sorry about that. Took me a second. I'm looking at your picture, and the vowel pointings really are blurry. Okay. And so the idea, it occurs 5 times, is to wax fat or to make fat. The wax fat is a little bit more of an Old English sort of translation of this word. And I am really sorry about the PowerPoint. Cox is just not giving me the high speed tonight. And so you are getting the results of that lovely high speed. So we're going to keep going and hope the power increases a little bit. Just, what can I say? Lord, I pray you'd make this come out a little clearer. Now, what's interesting about this word, and the reason I picked it, and let me tell you why I picked it, because the two ends of its meaning are very different. And so when I was in Hebrew class, we didn't look as much at the central concept. We learned our vocabulary. We memorized it well. We learned it. We learned how to read. We learned the grammar. But we didn't always spend a lot of time on why this range of meaning works. And it works because there's a central concept in the word that can be taken in more than one way. And so as I've gone past that Hebrew education in seminary, which was very extensive, we just didn't spend as much time with that aspect. I got fascinated by the fact that it could have such a range of meanings for a particular Hebrew word, especially some Hebrew words, because English doesn't do that as much. And so that sort of fascinated me a little. And so I've spent some time looking at the Hebrew word and saying, okay, so what is the central concept? And so the interesting thing is that the concept here of waxing fat or making fat can have the idea of energetic, even the idea of richness. Like Like, we say that food is very rich. It's got a lot of fat in it. It has a mouth feel. We could say that someone who's very rich is likely to be uh, overweight if they don't hire a fitness instructor. The idea that something is prosperous or full can be part of the idea of fatness in the sense of fullness. We could talk about being fat, but the same word can have the idea of being thick. So we say someone that, he's not very smart. He's a real thick individual. We aren't necessarily meaning that he's a rich individual. We aren't meaning necessarily that he's an energetic individual. He's well nourished. We have the idea of growing fat, but being thick has a different sort of feel to it. If we say that someone's thick in the head, we mean things don't penetrate. In the negative sense, this idea can have the ideas of a heart growing thick or calloused, unresponsive, lethargic. And so this Hebrew word to become fat, to make fat, or to wax fat can have a positive idea, the fatness of the land, or it can have a negative idea such as people's ears have grown fat, or their hearts actually have grown fat. They become unresponsive. And so that's our Hebrew word for tonight. And hopefully you saw the root. And I'm sorry if you didn't. It looks better on my screen than it does on yours. Shaman. And so I'm sorry about that. We just got to deal with it where it lies. Tonight's lesson. Now, refrigerator magnet saying. Remember I talked about my refrigerator magnets? They're little sayings. And when I used to do Bible studies in Vermont, Steve's pointing out something here. How would you tell the difference? He's pointing out, a very important principle here. How do you deal with the difference between these? And so I'm going to move him up here. Hey there, Steve. That is a really good idea. And context would determine the meaning as to whether it's being used positively or negatively. You're absolutely right about that. And a lot of Hebrew does have to do with the context. And so given the range of meanings, you could see how that could happen. Spell it, please. Oh, wow. I always think of transliteration as the 11th plague, but I'm going to do my best. All right. This is like really bad because some Hebrew vowels and letters don't. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. You can have a double here because you're going to have two vowels. One is long and one is short. So the first A is short, Sha, and then main, the A is saying its name, Shamain. That's the best I can do with the voweling. You saw the vowel markings. The only thing I could do, okay, oh, Hebrew is okay. Okay, I could do that. Let me go to my Hebrew keyboard. I'm being asked to do it in Hebrew here. I'm going to go to the Hebrew keyboard. I'm going to punch that in. I'm going to try. Again, everything is, there we go. There you go. And I got to give you a final noon there. I'm going to close that. I'm going to put this back on English so I don't keep typing. And I'm going to try to move it over for you. And probably not going to let me do that, right? Because Hebrew works the other way. There we go. It did. Good. There you go. That's pretty much what you're going to have to do to get it. Now we're in 13, so I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint and get that for you. There we go. A refrigerator magnet saying for tonight. God is not interested in titillating our excitement, but enlisting our faithfulness. And so I used to have these refrigerator magnet sayings that I used to do at a Bible study or I'd come up with, and people really loved them. And one lady even wanted to write them down. And so I've started going back to the refrigerator magnet sayings. All right. Glad to have you aboard. Someone else just entered the house. We are having some technical difficulties. I'm sorry about the Cox effect, but we are having some problems. And then Minicam didn't want to do things and keep scenes. So if anybody is an expert on Minicam and would like to tell me how to go ahead and save certain pre-setups, I would absolutely love to know that great secret. Or I may someday have to revisit OBS. Or maybe even look into Restream. So that's a thought too. But we'll work with it. Some nights are just better than others. So we're going to get going. There's our refrigerator magnet saying, because you're going to have trouble reading it, again, God is not interested in titillating our excitement, but enlisting our faithfulness. That's our refrigerator. We are in Matthew 13:10 and on. So we're going to go ahead and talk about why the use of parables. Now, if you're reading along, we were introduced to the parable of the sower. We talked a little bit about it, but Jesus is going to give the interpretation of the parable of the sower. And so we got introduced to the parable. We talked about some principles, but we didn't hear Jesus give the interpretation because there's a break here in the text. And so Jesus makes two statements. It is the privilege of the disciples to know the mystery of the kingdom. And we discussed how Romans 3 said that Israel was entrusted with the oracles of God, but the steward of the mysteries is actually the body of believers, the church. And so Israel is actually called the steward of the mysteries of God. And Paul reveals many of these mysterion. And so it is for the disciples to know the mystery of the kingdom. And so they are told this is their privilege. They're told that he who has will receive more. And we talked about that. If you respond to light, more light is given. Now, that's true pre-saving as well as saving, and to a certain extent post-saving. Salvation, okay? I believe in pre-evangelism. I believe that God is sovereign, but you are responding to what he is, his drawing and his leading. You are responding before you even get saved. Now, sometimes that's a very quick process, and it's 1, 2, 3, and you're there. For some of us, it's a slower process. And so that depends on what God had to do in your life. And see, he's patient to know what he needs to do and what your responses are going to be, and to work with those responses sovereignly to bring about his result. And that all gets really complicated, but that's all where we were last week. This week is a little different. We're going to get the we're going to get at least this parable and the other parable, and Jesus's reason for giving parables. So it breaks off after he tells them these two things, because really they've been asked, why do you speak to them in parables? Why do you do this? And Jesus tells them about their privilege, and then the fact that to the diligent, to the responsive, more is given. Then he goes on to say, therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and shall not perceive, for the hearts of these people has grown dull. Now that's the same idea as wax fat, the Hebrew word we talked about. I picked it very deliberately because when you look at this passage, the word grown dull here is the Greek word used for the Hebrew word we discussed tonight in the Septuagint. Isn't that interesting? And I do that to kind of try and tie the Greek words that are used for Hebrew concepts through the translation of the Septuagint. And I just like to do that because it gives a sort of Rosetta Stone from the Greek to the Hebrew. Now, it's not the only way, it's a simplistic way, but it's a start. And so Jesus basically quotes this. They're hearing me, but they're not hearing me. They're spiritually unresponsive. They see, but they aren't fully really perceiving it. Okay, they see like they perceive. It's not visible see, but metaphorically, but they don't get it. Okay, they're clueless. They're not really getting it at all. In them, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. Now, we talked about Old Testament usage in the New Testament. Was Isaiah talking about that directly? Well, he was talking about the same problem that Israel had in his day. In other words, Israel had the exact same problem. They were spiritually unresponsive in his day, and he's prophesying, and people aren't getting it. And so Jesus says this is what was spoken to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah. And Jesus is saying, like then, but more so. Okay, just as, more. Almost like a light to heavy. What was true in Isaiah's day is even more true now. And this fulfills Isaiah's words in an extended sort of way. Okay? Someone greater than Isaiah is here, and just as they didn't hear in his day, so the meaning is being even fuller in them doing the exact same thing. They're not getting it. So I speak to them in parables. Parables will confuse those who will not hear and draw the attention and seeking of those who want to know. So they're a very good device. And so Isaiah says this, and Jesus is using this in one of those ways of fulfillment. This isn't a direct fulfillment, but we talked about typical fulfillment. We talked about other forms of fulfillment. I can't bring them right up into my head right now, but we talked about them. This isn't so much a typical fulfillment because it's not so much that Isaiah is a direct, I wouldn't necessarily say I see a typical fulfillment, but there's another sort of fulfillment that's kind of a principle fulfillment where something fulfills the principle of something else. And you can go back to that previous video because certainly not doctor, please, Rabbi Singer gets very mad at the New Testament writer's use of Isaiah, and he would say this is an inappropriate fulfillment use of Isaiah. See, these New Testament writers don't know what they're talking about, and yes, they do. They're using a perfectly legitimate way to understand the verse. He goes on, their ears have become hard of hearing, their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand, their hearts turn, and I heal them. It may sound like God's deliberately doesn't want them to believe. I don't think that's the point here. The point is basically God is letting them continue to have some obstinacy. And so that's what we're dealing with there. God will let men resist if he so chooses. He is sovereign and he has the right to do that. And so he is allowing them the freedom to go ahead and resist him. And so that's where we're at there. There we go. And so we see that usage there. And so that's the principle behind the parables. Okay. What do parables do? Well, Jesus does say, blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. So he tells the disciples they're blessed for understanding this. Most assuredly, I say to you, many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and hear what you hear and did not hear it. They are the ones to whom the great messianic age transition has fallen, and they're in a unique place in history. And so they are blessed. Purpose of parables, again, it's a shell that keeps good fruit for the diligent, but keeps it from the slothful. And they are a brilliant strategy. Jesus is not giving any more information to his detractors than he needs to. He's not giving any more information to those that do not have ears to hear than he needs to. But on the other hand, he is providing for those who will seek information so that they might seek more, be drawn more, and come. And so that's essentially what we're dealing with here. Okay? Again, you know, you have that following that quote of Isaiah, and it's perfectly legitimate. Why would God do this? We know Jesus, it's a brilliant strategy for him, but why doesn't God just make it real clear? God is interested in the one who sincerely follows him. And that's why I created this slide. Now, I say in the slide it's a typical fulfillment, and I don't want to infer that, you know, I'm guilty of a little equivocation here. Typical in the sense of principle, not typical in the sense that Isaiah is a Christ, a type of Christ. So when you look at that slide, you might want to just kind of put that word in parentheses so that you're not confused as to how I'm using it. And, you know, I think better of my wording. What is true of Isaiah is true of Messiah, but that doesn't mean that Isaiah is a type of Messiah. Now, my daughter's always saying she's not much for scriptural typing. So while those who resist simply become hardened, and that's true, resist God and it produces hardening. In the case of the believer, God doesn't let it go too far, and he will crack that. In the case of the unbeliever, they're just fitting themselves for a destiny that they're choosing. Okay, they're explicitly about the kingdom of heaven. They set out the demands and paradoxes of the new order that Jesus came to establish. Did you notice that new order? I got a lot of people I know, a few in my family, that they're all looking for the new order. The new order has come. The new normal is the kingdom. It's the only good normal that's new that you could have it. And so the new normal has kind of the new normal has sort of is the kingdom. That will be the real normal, by the way. That will be things the way they're supposed to be, a lot more than now. And so they're paradoxes. And again, we keep talking about this. One of the big Jewish arguments is if Jesus was the Messiah, why didn't people accept him? And Jesus really spends some time explaining people are going to react differently to the kingdom. The disciples have the master with them, and they're going to be given the insight. See, if you want to understand a parable, there's no one better to explain it to you than Jesus. Okay? And Israel was not made the steward of the mysteries of God. There were things Israel didn't know. I don't believe the church existed in the Old Testament. Paul says it was a mystery previously unrevealed in Ephesians. Israel did not, the church did not exist in the Old Testament. Not the church as we know it. Because Paul is very clear in Ephesians 3, and I can quickly go there. You can stay in Matthew. But he's very, very clear in Ephesians 3. And this is not hard to understand stuff. But I'm going to go to Ephesians 3, and he's going to say it's a mystery. Okay, he's going to say this didn't happen. Ephesians 3:1, for this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ, for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God which has been given to you, how by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I've already written briefly, by which when you read you will understand my knowledge in Christ, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, but was revealed by the Holy Spirit through his holy apostles and prophets, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs of the same body and partakers of the promise in Christ through the gospel, of which I have become a minister according to the gift of grace God has given to me by the effective working of his power. That's the church. The mystery is the church, and Israel didn't have this mystery. Isaiah never ever pictured the church. But the disciples have the mysteries of the kingdom, the paradoxes of the kingdom. By the way, one of the great paradoxes is that the Gentiles would become equal heirs without having to go through Israel at all. None of you have to be Jewish to be saved. Isn't that great? God wanted to bring the nations, but he isn't going through Israel. He's created a unique thing called the church. And so they're going to know mysteries that Israel didn't know. And so they're going to understand things about the kingdom. And this parable is going to help with some of these paradoxes and why people are going to respond differently to the kingdom. And we said that before, and now we get the explanation of the parable of the sower. Okay? Knowing that the disciples stand in a very unique position. The prophets of old did not know what they know. They did not hear what these disciples are hearing. This is big news. This is incredible stuff. And so the disciples are in this unique position, hearing things that the prophets would have loved to have understood. They would have liked to have known about this. They would have liked to have understood about God's plans. They would have probably been a little shocked, but they stand in a unique position. And they're being given the direct information. They don't have to guess at what the parable's about. They don't have to check a commentary. They're being given the parable's meaning by the master. It's very clear the disciples did not understand the parable. Now, here's the important thing to understand. The disciples didn't get it either. Okay, we got to be fair about this. It's not like the disciples are super geniuses and they get it and no one else does. They didn't understand it either. They say, why do you speak to them in parables? But there's no indication that the disciples understood it. And the fact that Jesus has to go on and explain this parable in the next pericope, 18 through 23, indicates that the disciples didn't get it either. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't waste his time explaining to them what he knew. And believe me, he would know. And so he goes ahead and explains it. Now, Jesus is going to talk about the soils. And I put the Greek up, and I really kind of wish this was coming out better tonight. But the Cox connection is just what it is. So, Lord, give people good eyes and let it look better in the future. Such is our world. Let's go to that first soil there and let's understand what Jesus is saying. Anyone who hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches it away, what was sown in his heart. He is the seed that, this is he who received the seed by the wayside. Now remember, that's the first soil. A sower went out to sow, and then some of the seed falls in the wayside. Okay, it's very interesting what creature comes to go ahead and eat it. It says the birds came and devoured them. Now, birds were sometimes a symbol of evil. And so in this case, Jesus says, in this case, the birds are more like the birds during the Hitchcock movie, The Birds, than they are like the wonderful things that give us music, and we're fascinated by them as they fly, or they're majestic looking like an eagle. This is kind of like, and the crows came, the ugly, ugly sounding crows came, and they took the seed, and we find out that they're symbolic of the evil one. Now we know who the evil one is. Jesus doesn't have any illusions. He doesn't believe it's a psychological phenomena. He believes in a literal fallen angel whose name was Lucifer and gets the title Ha-Satan. I do want to let you know, Satan is not a proper name, it's a title. Satan is actually Lucifer. He was given a lovely name and a great position. He wanted more and he got less. And he's going to have a lot less. Okay? And so that's the parable of the soil. Now let's dig into this, okay? It might sound like Jesus is saying, he who hears the word of the kingdom, and he's just not very bright. Okay, he has intellectual impairments. Then the wicked one comes. You know, and you know, Jesus is sort of making fun of the mentally handicapped here or something, you know. Someone might get that idea. And so I went to the Greek, which has the idea of being able to evaluate, to comprehend, to put things together. And Jesus is using this in the sense of moral foolishness. Now you need to understand the way it worked in Hebrew. You can have somebody who is intellectually impaired, but there's a term for fool. Navel, actually one of David ends up running into a guy like this. All right, and this is a morally foolish person. Okay. Remember that when you read Proverbs, it talks about the fool. It's not just talking about somebody who, you know, just is unfortunately was born that way. It's talking about the individual that's morally foolish. So let's read it like that. Anyone who hears the kingdom but doesn't have the moral discernment, the moral wherewithal to comprehend it. He doesn't because he doesn't really want to bad enough. Okay? You know what people treasure by what they're willing to go through. If people really want to do good, it's going to cost. If people want to do evil, it's going to cost too, but the price tag comes later. It's more like a delayed credit card action in the case of evil. Sometimes the blessings of good take time to reach us, but the reality is that the individual who truly wants to do good is going to have to exert some will, some effort. We are not totally passive. That's not my view of human beings as image bearers. And so the one who wants to know but really doesn't want to know. The one who doesn't want to know. The evil one comes and just removes the message. If you don't want to hear, you don't have to hear. You don't have to know if you don't want to know. And Satan will be glad to help you in your not knowing. And it looks like the connection's improved. I don't know if the picture will improve, but I'm hoping it does. And so that's what we're dealing with here. That's that first soil. The individual who does not want to make the changes or strive or put any effort into it. They're morally lazy or morally hardened. And before I go there, okay, this can explain how someone can be a really, really intelligent man like Stephen Hawking's and still be utterly foolish when it comes to the spiritual and moral things of life. I run into atheists all the time who are very sophisticated in their reasoning, but they are foolish. They cannot understand it because they don't want to know. There's a little refrigerator magnet saying that I love. One of my refrigerator magnet sayings, the mind will not go where the will does not permit. Let's get on to the second soil. The second soil, this is the individual who merely has a emotional or superficial response to the gospel. Okay? I'm going to be careful here. Am I against Billy Graham crusades? No. Am I against Harvest Ministry crusades? No. I've been to them. I've worked at them. I'm not against them. All right? But you would get a picture from the camera shot of those going forward of a huge city going forward to be saved. Okay, that's just the way it looks from the camera. All right? And sometimes a lot of people go forward due to emotional. I know somebody who went to a Billy Graham crusade. He got saved after the crusade. He thought he was saved before. A couple days later, he realized that he really hadn't made a serious commitment. He felt he should go forward. He felt some things there, but it just wasn't a real commitment. He realized that even though he kind of wanted to go forward, he really wasn't totally ready to do that night, but he was ready a few nights later. And what that tells me is that he felt pressure to go forward. There was some real stuff there. He wasn't being insincere, faking people out, but his heart wasn't ready really to let go and believe on Jesus. He wasn't ready. He had prematurely gone forward by a day or two. And so we can see a lot of people go forward at a Crusader outreach event. It's not bad. He's casting the seed broadly. That's what a Billy Graham's doing. A sower went out to sow, and he's throwing a lot of seed out there. Boom, 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 a lot of seed. That's what a harvest ministry crusade looks like. A lot of seed. Let's get that seed out there. Boom. Let's cast it. Get your friends here. Let's cast all the seed. And that's very good. Okay? The funny thing is to do a longitudinal study of how many people who go forward are actually walking a Christian walk 5 years later and 10 years later. Okay? Good seed throwing, but some of that seed falls in the shallow soil. All right? And that's Jesus is explaining. And so how do we explain someone who goes forward at a Billy Graham crusade and doesn't continue in his walk? Well, sometimes we explain that because the soil of his heart was too shallow. It was a shallow response. All right? And so there was emotional reaction, but the person wasn't fully engaged. It wasn't a complete thing. It was sort of like a false start. And so it didn't take. Okay? But he who received the seed on the stony places, he hears the word and he receives it gladly at the time. Okay, there's some sort of shallow response, an emotional response, yet he has no root in himself. He endures only a while. But when tribulation and persecution arises because of the word, he immediately stumbles. All right? This is why I don't like missionaries being asked questions like, how many people have you seen get saved? I don't know any people I've seen get saved. I mean, the best a missionary can know or a street evangelist can know is how many people made a profession. I can't look in someone's heart. I can believe that they're sincere. There was a genuine conversion. I can really sense that maybe they want to pray to receive the Lord, but I can't tell if the transaction took place. My x-ray vision doesn't extend that far. There's no way I could know that. And so that's a really hard question. The question the missionary needs to be asked is, is there an indication that God's working in your life and in your ministry? And are you faithfully doing what God asked you to do? The rest is all God's business. We got to get out of the counting heads business. It sounds exciting. It sounds great. Missionaries definitely want to tell great stories. You know, I wish I had a book of great stories for every monthly newsletter. Okay, that would be so cool. But you know, I'm not sitting there with a thing to put notches on my belt. And so we got to be careful with that. The best way to gauge fruit is over time. I had a hand in, okay, because sometimes you're the guy who makes the shot on the goal. Sometimes you're the guy who passes the puck to the guy who makes the shot on the goal. It's called an assist in hockey, okay? I helped with the leading of a young couple to the Lord. He is now an elder in a church that I helped plant. His family is a wonderful Christian family. They've adopted kids. He's been on short-term missions trips to Africa. It's still bearing fruit. Okay. Over time, he is continuing to demonstrate that there was something very true about that conversion. And so, do I consider that a great victory for the kingdom? I'm still in touch with them. They were the guys I taught at the Bible study in Vermont, and they're still trugging along. And I am excited for that. Let's talk about the third soil. All right. Now he who receives the word among the thorns is he who hears the word, but the cares of this world and deceitfulness of riches choke out the word, and it becomes unfruitful. So this is the third soil. It's somewhat like the second soil, right? Uh, but it doesn't sound quite as emotional when Jesus talks about it. Okay? This is kind of superficial too, but it may not be as emotional. And I'm not, you know, perfectly aligned. You're a soil number 2, okay? You're a soil number, you know, I don't do that sort of thing here. In one case, persecution comes, it gets hard. The Christian life gets hard. Here, the cares of the world end up intervening. Can we see this sort of soil ever happen? Well, I think it can. I have heard stories over and over again of Christians dating unbelievers. We call it missionary dating, but it's not very missionary and it's not good dating. All right. And so that sometimes happens. And so they'll be dating and then they'll tell that person, you know, the lovely young lady who is just drop dead gorgeous and shows the glory of the Lord in her, she loves the Lord and, you know, she's also been well constructed by him and, you know, she, you know, she really wants to spend her life with this guy and have him be saved and enjoy the Lord together. I mean, she really wants this. She's sincere. And so she starts sharing the gospel with him like crazy, nuts, mad, you know, sharing it, pouring out her heart, praying for his soul. I mean, she's wearing, you know, she's just wearing the gates of heaven down to get this guy in so that they can get married and this whole thing here. And he makes this profession here and they get married down the line. And I've seen this happen. The names are withheld to protect the poor suffering, you know, and sometimes there'll even be Christians that come along and try to say something, but no, 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 no. You know, Joe there, he made a profession of faith. I really think he's saved. And then a year or two down the line, Jesus is not a part of his life. And you know, he's not acting the part. He's not pursuing Christ at all. There's no spirituality, and you know, this dear young sister wakes up with what happened. Okay, the deceitfulness of the world. Okay, the cares of this world. He's not real concerned about that. It wasn't a real thing. Now, it's also warning to us. We can't let the cares of the world choke out the word we've received in our salvation. Otherwise, we will prove ourselves to be that third soil. We can't let pressure crush us. I want to be careful here. Okay, I come from a Jewish family where Jesus is not very welcomed, and there are some secret believers in the Jewish Hasidic community. I'm sure there are. I don't know who they are because they're a secret to me. Um, I'm not saying you can't have a moment of weakness here. Peter did. I'm not saying that if someone's pointing a gun to your head, and you know, what I am saying is Jesus is talking about incomplete salvations here, and the word becomes unfruitful. All right. So different responses. Some people are going to jump at it, and then the demands of the gospel are going to come forward and they're going to fall away. Others are just going to get sidetracked away from God. All right. And we can see this sort of thing happen. Let's talk about the fourth soil. Now, the fourth soil is the good soil. That means that 3/4 of the responses we get have the potential for being false starts as far as salvations. All right. And I'm not trying to kind of depress anybody here, but see, what I want you to understand is that gospel work's really hard work. And while the returns in heaven are absolutely wonderful, the returns on earth sometimes lack a little something. And I think people really want massive cornflake, add milk reactions to spiritual things. And so I'm telling you, beware of a cornflake mentality when it comes to the work of God. You cannot afford a cornflake mentality. So, Jesus very clearly teaches the disciples there'll be different responses to the gospel. Don't be shocked. Do not be dismayed. He lets the disciples know the problem isn't with the king or his message. Now, it's very important. It's not a problem with Jesus that there are these different responses. No, Rabbi Singer, you're wrong. Simply because Jesus is the Messiah does not mean that every Jew would respond to him. It does not mean he would be accepted by the leadership at that time. Yes, there will come a day when the pride of Israel will be broken. But the argument that just because it wasn't at that time and that response didn't happen, so Jesus isn't the Messiah, is a wrong understanding of the kingdom. The people were not ready. So yes, it's not a problem with Jesus. It's not a problem with the gospel. If people don't respond to the gospel, it's not because it's a problem with the gospel. It's a problem with the people. It can sometimes be a problem with the messenger, because we can all have bad days and do something not quite, we could kind of, I'm not talking about doing things exactly right. I'm talking about, I'm not hearing the person's objection. I'm not responding, right. My brain is in the punch bowl when I'm sharing. I mean, things like that happen. But what it is never is a problem with Jesus. All right. Okay. The comment, yeah, as I said, Christianity is not, Jesus is not the Messiah because everyone accepted him. Be careful of that too. What everyone accepts is not necessarily the truth. Okay. Also, when we look at this last soil, we see something very interesting here. He who receives the seed on the good ground is he who hears it, understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. Here's the interesting thing. Not every Christian produces the same amount of fruit. We sometimes lose that in the translation too. Not every Christian produces the same amount of fruit. And we can't expect that that's going to necessarily be the case. I do not have to be Charles Spurgeon. Believe me, tonight, okay, some nights, man, it flows better than others. The cable's working, the picture's great, the reception's wonderful. Some nights, everything doesn't go perfectly. I have to be, aware of that. Some preachers' messages, man, Pastor, you delivered that. That message was incredible. I felt the spirit in it, and I really understood the passage better than I've ever understood it. And I'm never going to see that passage the same. And wow, did that ever speak to me? And then sometimes the pastor gets up to the plate there, and he swings the bat, and it just doesn't work out quite the way he expected it to. So, have to be kind of careful about that. Different fruit, different believers, different times, different roles. Ravi Zacharias was called to be Ravi Zacharias. I wasn't. And so that's just the way it is. And God knows what he's doing with our lives. Sometimes, to the unbeliever who wants to use this as an excuse, okay? Hey, there are different responses to the gospel. I can't really be sure of this. I can never really know if it's true. I mean, some people believe it and some people don't. There's sort of a mixed opinion on this Jesus guy. So how could I know it's ever true? Because, really, if he was God, it would be super clear and I wouldn't have to even debate it or think about it at all. It would just be easy and simple. No. In fact, I want to say to the atheist who says, look at how many people look how many scientists don't believe in Christianity. This is like a favorite. Look how many scientists don't believe in God. I want to say to the atheist, okay, here's the thing. Over the course of history, you're going to talk about this. I know plenty of atheists who will say, well, Christians don't act like. Look at the wars in the name of Christianity. I mean, that's a common. Hey, look, does every atheist act perfectly? Is every atheist morally perfect? Then why does every Christian have to be morally perfect? Can I reject your atheism based on the conduct of every atheist? If you're going to reject my Christianity based on the conduct of every Christian, because different Christians produce different fruit at different times. And so the atheist will say, well, if you were a Christian, if your God was really real, how do you explain the actions of some Christians? And I say, well, if God isn't real, how do you explain the actions of some atheists? And you just turn that argument around on them. If that's your standard, the conduct of a certain group of people determines whether their beliefs are true, then I get to apply that standard to you. And that's not a legit standard. So, take-home truths. We had the refrigerator magnet saying, but here are the take-homes. Just because you go in a garage doesn't make you a car. Just because you say you're a Christian doesn't make you saved. If you're saved, you should say you're a Christian or a follower of Jesus or a Christ follower. I mean, you don't have to use the exact term Christian. I use the term Messianic Jew sometimes. I mean, it's not a problem. But yes, the redeemed of the Lord should say so. But just because you say so doesn't make you the redeemed of the Lord. The reality of your acceptance of Jesus and his work on the cross is the real issue, not whether you know how to talk Christianese. Okay, and there are people who grew up learning how to talk Christianese. Okay? The expectation of an immediate or large response to the gospel ignores the point of this parable. It does happen. God is doing a particular work at a particular time, and that means redeeming and regenerating a lot of people. But the expectation of that ignores the point of the parable. Gospel work is grueling. Jewish missions work is grueling. It's slow. Sometimes there's little response. This does not mean we abandon the work. Witnessing to your neighbor who does not like Jesus and continuing to love them and invite them may be slow. It may be grueling. Talking to family members who don't believe can be agonizing. All right? But you don't necessarily abandon the work or the ministry location. William Carey saw very few converts. He is my hero in a lot of ways. He said, this one thing I could do for God, I can plod. And I'm a William Carey kind of guy. I will tell you that some people want to run from one ministry location to the other. It's a real temptation because maybe I'll see fruit over there. I know pastors and individuals who gave up works because they didn't see a church planted or a core group for a church form in 6 weeks. I'm sorry, that's just not the way I read this parable. Okay? I know individuals that want to go to mission fields simply because there seems to be a response there. Look, if God's working there, you want to be where God's working, but make sure that He wants you doing that work. All right? Don't let titillation become a substitute for faithfulness. All right? And faithfulness sometimes means being a Jeremiah, who was the weeping prophet and preached and preached and preached and preached and ended up in Babylonian exile. And God said, you know, they're not going to respond. Make these people's ears dull with the word of God. 90% of your ministry is going to be hardening them. And there'll be a remnant. And I will draw out the remnant as you go ahead and preach this. But most of what you're going to see is hardening as I pull the remnant out. God wants to enlist our faithfulness. And that's what it's all about. Now I'm going to switch over to the chat here, which did not work as well as I might want, but you can see the questions there. And say if anybody wants to chime in, you can feel free to chime in right now. I'm going to pull that chat up, and you can just chime, and I'll respond to you. There were some great questions. If anything's come up, and you're just interested in kind of adding to it, that's fine. And I can go ahead and respond to that, and people can see it. I know it takes a few minutes to type. I'll give you a few minutes. It's been about that hour, and it's probably later where you are, so I understand. And it's been a while since I've seen a few of you, so I almost want to give you first crack at this. No, that's probably not going to happen, and it may be God's will. Someone asked if I got to debate Lewis. That may be God's will. I may not be quite ready to do the presentation God wants me to do, and I accept that. And I really talked to him about that. I want to do the best job possible, and he may know the timing's not right with COVID and everything else. And so I'm going to leave that to him. I backed off on preparing for that because God's given me a few other things to do. And God may just be redirecting the ministry a little for the time being. And so I'll accept that kind of redirection. And I'm perfectly comfortable with it. So, good question. Thank you. Corinth. And now the picture looks great. Oh, that's a killer. All right. I'm going to get some of the kinks out, but I love being able to have the chat up. I've just got to figure out. Oh, wait. There you go. Cool. Well, being on Vocab Show is always a hit, and I really enjoy it. So that's great. We're small, but we're marching on. As I said, we're about 2 or 3 away from 300. You know. Oh, it seems you reached. I'm sorry, I misread that. Does it? Okay. Well, you are a great member of the community and you know more than I did. So that is too cool. And I will hope that to be the case. And I will praise the Lord on the next show. Maybe I'll create a nice praise graphic and throw it up there, and say, wow, we did it. So that is too cool. So I'm excited about that. Well, stay safe. And we'll continue to work the kinks out. I threw the chat in because I want to keep improving things, and we'll get better at it too. So, Minicam continues to educate me. So may I be educated. Well, seeing that, hey, special thanks. I can say this because I had not seen John the Armenian for a while, and so it's good to have you here. If you didn't hit the like, hit the like. And tell your friends and spread the word. And I'm going to, hey, remember about the concert. If you want a free concert, just grab yourself a virtual seat. And I'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. I'll put a sneak peek up and via the Facebook. And who knows, sometime if I think it's really cool, I'll jump in there and find other ways to give you guys a sneak peek. So God bless. Ooh. And I'll turn off the Hebrew when I try to say God bless, because I just got an I in instead of a G.